More than 400 million years ago, the oceans were a nightmare. Dark ancient waters where every shadow could mean death, where the next move might trigger a sudden violent attack. Fossils from that time tell a brutal story. Bones covered in deep teeth marks, some healed over, only to be bitten again later. The same animals attacked not once, but over and over in the same waters. Skeletons lie together in tangled piles, not gently buried, but caught in sudden savage fights. Different creatures, all showing broken bones, ripped armor, and signs of being partially eaten. Predation wasn't rare, it was non-stop. In these waters, even the biggest animals weren't safe. Huge, heavily armored bodies actually drew more attention. Simply moving could get you chased down. Even in brighter shallows, there was almost nowhere to hide. Some of these hunters had jaws like bone-crushing machines, powerful enough to smash through thick armor in one snap. Others struck with long, stretching necks, reaching out fast before their prey could even react. This pattern shows up again and again across different oceans and different species, the same deadly game playing out everywhere. But what kind of world creates conditions that turn entire stretches of ocean into places where almost everything is either hunting or being hunted? To answer this, we're going to drift back into those ancient waters, slowly, and take a long look at the creatures that made them so extraordinary. If you love these thrilling journeys into Earth's oceans, smash that like button and subscribe so you never miss the next one. Now, let's plunge into the ancient oceans and meet the monsters that ruled them. Long before stability settled into the oceans, there was a quiet imbalance woven into the water itself, a set of conditions that encouraged life to expand while never allowing it to rest. The warmth of the planet lingered across immense spans of sea, not as a surface heat alone, but as a presence that reached downward, altering the way the ocean held and distributed its essential elements. Chemical exchanges unfolded with greater ease, allowing nutrients to remain suspended and available, circulating through currents that carried them across wide regions. Within this environment, oxygen moved more freely than in earlier ages, dissolving into the water and entering the bodies of organisms with little resistance. This steady supply supported internal processes that demanded more energy, allowing tissues to grow denser and movements to become more sustained. Over time, bodies began to extend beyond earlier limitations, their forms becoming larger and more capable of exerting force. Growth did not arrive suddenly, but accumulated gradually, carried forward through countless generations that each held a slight advantage over the last. The shape of the planet further guided this transformation. Much of the land lay low, and the oceans spread across it, forming expansive shallow seas that stretched for great distances. Sunlight passed easily into these waters, illuminating layers that had once remained dim and supporting dense communities of life. Microscopic organisms gathered in immense numbers, forming the foundation of a system that transferred energy upward through increasingly complex forms. Each level depended on the one below it, creating a continuous flow that rarely paused. In such crowded conditions, proximity became unavoidable. Organisms moved through shared spaces where encounters were constant, where the presence of others could be sensed through subtle shifts in the water. Food existed in abundance, yet it was never without competition. Each opportunity to feed was brief, shaped by timing and position rather than sheer availability. The difference between gaining energy and losing it became narrow, defined by small margins that repeated across every interaction. Under this steady pressure, even minor variations began to shape outcomes. A slightly faster movement allowed one organism to reach a resource before another. A more efficient structure reduced the effort required to move through water. Sensory adaptations refined the ability to detect faint disturbances, turning the surrounding ocean into a field of delicate signals that could be interpreted and acted upon. These advantages accumulated slowly, carried through reproduction, and expressed across entire populations. Change followed a continuous path, branching into multiple directions at once. Some forms grew heavier, developing outer layers that provided early protection against contact and impact. Others became more streamlined, reducing resistance and allowing smoother movement through the water. There were those that refined perception above all else, interpreting shifts in pressure and motion with increasing clarity. Each approach reflected a different response to the same underlying conditions, a different way of navigating a world shaped by abundance and competition. Yet the environment itself did not settle into permanence. These early oceans remained in flux, their conditions shifting over time as temperatures varied, currents redirected, and oxygen levels rose or fell across regions. Areas that once supported dense populations could thin, while new zones of activity emerged elsewhere. Life adjusted within this shifting framework, never fully anchored, always responding to changes that unfolded beyond its control. This constant motion shaped the rhythm of existence. Growth was encouraged, but stability remained out of reach. Every advantage carried the possibility of being matched or surpassed, and every structure existed within a system that continued to evolve around it. Within these waters, life expanded not into stillness, but into a continuous state of adjustment, guided by conditions that favored both opportunity and relentless change. Scars remained where bone had once been broken, preserved in silence long after the motion that caused them had faded. Along the surfaces of ancient skeletons, patterns of damage appeared with striking consistency, deep grooves pressed into hardened structures, edges fractured and later mended. These marks did not belong to chance or slow decay. They carried the shape of teeth, the imprint of force applied with intent, left behind by creatures that had met, not as distant threats, but in direct and violent contact. Some of these injuries had healed. Bone had grown back around the damage, smoothing over the breaks while preserving their outline. This quiet repair revealed something subtle yet significant. The same body had endured an attack, survived it, and continued moving through the water long enough to face another encounter. In certain fossils, fresh wounds crossed older ones, layers of conflict recorded within a single frame of remains. Life at this level did not end with a single failed moment. It continued within a pattern of repeated danger. Among the largest forms, these signs became more pronounced. Broad surfaces that once suggested strength and protection carried evidence of being targeted directly. The very scale that allowed these creatures to dominate their surroundings also made them visible, their movement impossible to conceal. Encounters between such bodies were not brief or accidental. They unfolded with force, leaving behind damage that spoke of impact, resistance, and persistence. In these interactions, the distinction between hunter and rival began to blur. The upper levels of the food chain, once defined by access to smaller prey, shifted toward a different dynamic. Creatures of comparable size and capability crossed paths, each carrying the potential to inflict harm on the other. The ocean, already dense with life, offered limited separation at this level. Movement brought proximity, and proximity increased the likelihood of confrontation. The marks left behind suggest that these encounters were not rare events. They appeared across different regions and among different species, repeating with a consistency that pointed to a broader pattern. Competition extended beyond the pursuit of smaller organisms and reached into the interactions between dominant forms. Energy demands remained high, and available resources, though abundant, were constantly contested. Under such conditions, even large bodies could become both pursuer and target within the same span of time. Awareness became a constant requirement. Movement through the water carried signals that others could detect, subtle disturbances that revealed position and direction. The ability to sense these changes, to respond before contact occurred, shaped survival in ways that extended beyond strength alone. A delay, even a brief one, could shift the outcome of an encounter, turning advantage into vulnerability. These pressures influenced behavior as much as form. Paths of movement adjusted, not randomly, but in response to the presence of others. Some organisms may have altered their depth or timing, reducing exposure during periods of higher activity. Others relied on bursts of motion, minimizing the duration of contact within shared space. Each adjustment reflected a response to the same underlying condition, a world where proximity carried risk at every level. Over time, this pattern settled into the structure of the ecosystem. Predation no longer moved in a single direction from large to small. It expanded into a network of interactions where size alone did not guarantee safety. The ocean held its richness, but within it, the balance had shifted. Life at the top no longer existed, apart from threat, but within it, shaped by encounters that left their traces etched into bone and carried forward through generations. There are moments in the fossil record where motion seems to pause, held in a single decisive act. A body caught mid-consumption, another lodged within its jaws, the final instant preserved with quiet clarity. In these still frames of deep time, one form appears again and again, long and powerful, shaped for control within open water. The mosasaur moved through the ancient seas with a presence that did not rely on concealment or hesitation. Its body extended with smooth continuity, a muscular length driven by a sweeping tail that propelled it forward with steady force. Limbs had become paddles, refined for steering rather than support, allowing it to adjust direction with subtle precision. Movement did not break the water, it flowed through it, carrying the animal forward with an efficiency that conserved energy while maintaining speed. This balance allowed it to cover distance without strain, approaching encounters with quiet momentum. At the front of this motion, its jaws defined its role. They opened wide, far beyond what might be expected from a creature of its form. The skull itself was not rigidly fixed, but composed of elements that could shift slightly against one another, increasing the span of its bite. Ligaments allowed the lower jaws to spread, accommodating prey that matched or exceeded the width of its own head. Teeth lined these jaws in curved rows, angled inward, so that anything caught would be guided deeper with each movement. This structure allowed the mosasaur to engage with prey in a direct and final manner. Rather than tearing apart smaller pieces, it often consumed large sections at once, reducing the need for prolonged struggle. Fossil evidence shows remains of other marine reptiles and sizable fish within the body cavity of these predators, their forms partially intact, indicating that they had been swallowed in substantial portions. Among these remains, there are also traces of sharks, suggesting encounters between hunters that ended with one absorbed into the other. The act of feeding was not rushed. Once captured, prey was maneuvered within the jaws through controlled adjustments, the head shifting to align the body of the victim for swallowing. This process relied on coordination between movement and structure, each part of the anatomy contributing to a sequence that unfolded with measured precision. Water resistance played a role, assisting in the positioning as the predator advanced slowly, allowing the prey to settle into place before being drawn inward. Around this capability, the rest of the body supported a life of wide-ranging movement. The mosasaur was not confined to a single region, but traversed open stretches of ocean, following currents and the distribution of potential food sources. Its senses, though less visibly defined in the fossil record, were tuned to detect motion and presence, guiding it toward encounters that could sustain its size and energy demands. Other large predators existed within these waters, yet the mosasaur occupied a position that combined reach, strength, and adaptability. It did not depend on a single strategy, but adjusted its approach based on opportunity. A swift strike could end one interaction, while a slower, more controlled engagement might define another. In both cases, its physical design allowed it to respond without hesitation, bringing each movement toward a conclusion shaped by its own capabilities. Within the broader pattern of life in these oceans, the mosasaur represented a form that had aligned itself closely with the conditions around it. Its structure, behavior, and range all reflected a system where encounters were frequent and outcomes needed to be decisive. Through this alignment, it moved as a presence that shaped the space around it, carrying forward the quiet intensity of a world defined by constant interaction. Before teeth took on their familiar shapes, another kind of mouth moved through the water, built not from rows of pointed enamel, but from sharpened plates that met with controlled precision. Dunkleosteus carried its feeding structure at the front of a body, encased in dense armor, each segment fitted together like interlocking stone. The head and upper torso formed a protective shield, a rigid frame that held firm even under pressure, while the rear of the body tapered into a more flexible form that allowed steady propulsion. Its jaws did not hinge in the way later predators would develop. Instead, bony plates curved inward, their edges honed through repeated use into surfaces capable of shearing rather than piercing. When these plates came together, they created a slicing action, closing with force that concentrated along narrow contact points. This design allowed the animal to cut cleanly through resistant material, reducing solid structures into manageable sections without prolonged effort. The power behind this motion came from muscles anchored within the armored head, arranged to deliver force efficiently across a short distance. Rather than relying on wide, sweeping bites, Dunkleosteus operated through rapid closure, bringing its jaw plates together with speed that amplified their effect. The result was a bite capable of overcoming dense tissue and even early forms of protective covering found on other organisms of its time. Its body moved with a deliberate rhythm. The armored front provided stability during encounters, allowing it to maintain position while engaging with prey. Behind this rigid section, the tail generated forward motion, pushing the animal through the water in controlled bursts. This combination of steadiness and propulsion created a balance between approach and impact, supporting a method of feeding that depended on precision rather than prolonged pursuit. Evidence preserved in fossil remains suggests that Dunkleosteus did not limit itself to smaller or unprotected prey. Fragments of bone bearing clean, sharp breaks align with the cutting edges of its jaw plates, indicating interactions with organisms that possessed their own forms of defense. In some cases, marks appear on remains that match the structure of Dunkleosteus itself, suggesting that encounters between individuals of the same kind could lead to direct conflict. Within these interactions, the distinction between feeding and competition became less defined. The same anatomical features that allowed efficient consumption also made it possible to engage with rivals of similar size. In environments where resources were actively contested, such encounters may have extended beyond territorial contact, moving into outcomes where one individual became a source of sustenance for another. This possibility is reflected in patterns of damage observed across certain fossil specimens, where the spacing and depth of marks correspond closely to the jaw structure of this predator. The sensory world of Dunkleosteus was shaped by proximity and movement. Its forward orientation, combined with the structure of its head, suggests a focus on what lay directly ahead. Subtle changes in water flow, shifts in position, and the presence of nearby bodies would have guided its actions, allowing it to align its approach with moments of opportunity. Each movement carried purpose, directed toward reducing the distance between itself and what it intended to engage. Over time, this design proved effective within the conditions of early marine ecosystems. Dunkleosteus occupied a role that combined resilience with efficiency, its armored form providing protection while its feeding mechanism delivered decisive results. It did not rely on extended struggle, but on the ability to bring each encounter to a swift conclusion, shaping its place within a world where interaction was constant and outcomes were often determined in a single motion. Far out in open water, where the seafloor dropped away and distances stretched without boundary, scale itself became a defining force. There, movement unfolded across wide expanses, and within that space, one presence carried a magnitude that reshaped the rhythm of everything around it. The Megalodon did not rely on concealment or intricate maneuvering. Its size alone altered encounters before they fully formed, its passage through the water leaving a wake that signaled its approach long before it arrived. Its body was built with a balance between mass and motion, a streamlined form that allowed it to travel efficiently despite its immense proportions. The tail drove it forward in steady sweeps, each movement displacing large volumes of water while conserving energy across long distances. This efficiency mattered, as the scale of its body demanded a constant intake of energy, a continuous cycle of movement and feeding that rarely paused. At the center of its design lay its teeth, arranged in broad rows that curved along powerful jaws. Each tooth was thick and triangular, edged with fine serrations that acted like a series of cutting surfaces. When brought together, these teeth did not merely grip, they sliced. The structure allowed the Megalodon to remove large sections from its prey in a single motion, reducing even massive bodies into portions that could be consumed more easily. Teeth were replaced continuously, new ones forming behind those that broke or wore down, ensuring that the cutting edge remained intact throughout its life. The prey it pursued reflected its own scale. Large marine animals, including early whales, moved through the same waters, their bodies carrying the mass required to sustain a predator of such size. Encounters between them were not fleeting. They unfolded across moments of alignment, where speed, direction, and timing converged. Fossilized bones from these animals bear marks that match the shape and spacing of megalodon teeth, curved impressions that trace the arc of a bite delivered with controlled force. These marks often appear along areas that would limit movement, suggesting an approach that focused on reducing the ability of prey to continue forward. Once mobility was affected, the outcome shifted, allowing the predator to remain alongside its target and continue the process. This method reduced the need for extended pursuit, aligning with the energy demands that shaped its behavior. Despite its size, the megalodon did not move without consideration. Each action carried a cost, and the balance between effort and reward guided its choices. Long distances were covered in search of suitable prey, following patterns of migration and distribution that shifted over time. The open ocean provided both opportunity and uncertainty, requiring constant adjustment as conditions changed. Within this environment, feeding was not an occasional event, but a necessity that defined existence. The energy required to sustain such a body meant that long periods without food could not be easily endured. This demand created a rhythm of continuous search and engagement, where each successful encounter supported only a limited span before the cycle resumed. Other large predators shared these waters, yet the Megalodon occupied a position defined by scale and capability. Its presence influenced the movement of others, shaping patterns that extended beyond direct interaction. Through its size, its cutting dentition, and its constant need for sustenance, it became a central force within the open ocean, moving steadily through a world where distance offered no separation from the demands of survival. Below the brighter layers where movement could be seen from a distance, there existed a depth where shapes dissolved into shadow and direction became uncertain. In this quieter space, forms could rise without immediate notice, carried upward by slow adjustments of muscle and fin. Among those that moved within this vertical path, Pliosaurs held a structure built not for extended reach, but for concentrated force delivered at close range. Their bodies were compact in proportion, with necks shortened and thickened, bringing the head closer to the center of mass. This arrangement reduced delay between motion and impact, allowing the entire body to contribute to a single forward action. The head itself was large, extending outward with a solidity that suggested weight and control. Within it, rows of sharp teeth projected downward and inward, forming a grasp that tightened as the jaws closed. Movement through the water was driven by 4 strong flippers, each stroke pushing against the surrounding medium with measured power. Rather than relying on long chases, Pliosaurs advanced in controlled approaches, conserving energy while maintaining readiness. Their path often carried them beneath other moving bodies, where light faded and outlines above became softened silhouettes. From this position, the distance between predator and prey could be reduced without immediate detection. The upward angle of approach aligned the head and jaws with the underside of passing animals, an area less guarded and less visible. A sudden acceleration, guided by the combined force of limbs and body, brought the Pliosaur into contact in a brief and decisive moment. The structure of its jaws supported this method. Teeth were not delicate or closely spaced, but robust and widely set, capable of penetrating deeply and holding fast. Once contact was made, the force of closure secured the prey, limiting its ability to escape through sudden movement. Evidence preserved in fossil remains of large marine organisms shows damage consistent with such encounters, marks that reflect a powerful grip applied from below or along the lower portions of the body. This approach allowed Pliosaurs to engage with prey that matched or exceeded their own size. The element of position reduced the need for prolonged pursuit, while the concentration of force ensured that each encounter moved quickly toward resolution. Their design favored efficiency in moments that mattered most, where timing and placement carried greater weight than sustained speed. Within the broader environment, this method created a different pattern of movement. Animals traveling through open water did not only navigate what lay ahead or beside them, but also what might rise from beneath. The vertical dimension of the ocean became an active space, where presence could shift from absence to contact within a narrow span of time. Pliosaurs occupied this space with a quiet consistency. Their bodies, balanced between strength and control, allowed them to remain within deeper layers while still responding to activity above. Sensory cues, carried through pressure changes and subtle vibrations, guided their ascent, aligning their movement with opportunities that passed overhead. Over time, this form proved effective within a system where encounters were shaped by position as much as by capability. The Pliosaur did not depend on extended visibility or continuous tracking. It relied on alignment, on placing itself within a path where interaction could unfold with minimal delay. In this way, it moved through the ancient seas as a presence that bridged depth and surface, rising from below with a structure designed to bring each approach to a controlled and immediate conclusion. A slender line extended through the water before the rest of the body followed, a quiet curve that shifted with subtle control. In that line, motion could travel ahead of mass, allowing contact to begin before the full presence arrived. The Plesiosaur carried this design in the length of its neck, a structure composed of many vertebrae that allowed gradual bending and fine adjustment, each segment contributing to a controlled and deliberate reach. The body behind it remained broader and more stable, supported by 4 flippers that moved in coordinated strokes. These limbs did not drive sudden acceleration, but sustained a steady glide that kept the animal balanced as its neck explored the space ahead. This separation between body and point of contact created a different rhythm of movement, one where approach could remain measured while the final action unfolded with quiet speed. At the end of the neck, the head was relatively small, its jaws narrow and lined with slender teeth. These teeth were not shaped for crushing or tearing large sections, but for holding on to smaller, agile prey. Their arrangement formed a kind of interlocking barrier, allowing the Plesiosaur to secure what it grasped without requiring overwhelming force. Precision replaced impact, and timing became more significant than strength alone. Within the water, this design allowed for a method of hunting that relied on minimal disturbance. The body could remain at a distance, its movement softened by the surrounding medium, while the neck extended into areas where smaller organisms moved. Fish and cephalopods, sensitive to shifts in current, might detect the larger body if it approached directly. By separating the point of contact from the main mass, the Plesiosaur reduced the signals that preceded its strike. This approach was particularly effective in conditions where visibility was limited. In deeper layers or in waters where suspended particles reduced clarity, outlines became indistinct, and perception relied more heavily on motion than on form. The narrow head and extended neck could move within this space with reduced visibility, allowing the Plesiosaur to align itself with passing prey before closing the distance in a brief, controlled motion. The strike itself did not rely on wide jaws or overwhelming speed, but on coordination. A subtle adjustment of the neck brought the head into position, followed by a quick closure of the jaws that secured the target. Once contact was made, the neck retracted, drawing the prey back toward the body where it could be managed and consumed. This sequence unfolded smoothly, each part of the anatomy contributing to a process that minimized resistance and maintained balance. Fossil evidence suggests that Plesiosaurs occupied a range of environments, from shallower regions to deeper zones where light diminished. Their eye placement and skull structure indicate an ability to function within varying levels of visibility, supporting a lifestyle that adapted to different conditions without requiring dramatic changes in form. This flexibility allowed them to move between spaces, adjusting their behavior to match the surrounding environment. In contrast to larger predators that relied on direct force or sudden impact, the Plesiosaur represented a quieter method of engagement. Its structure favored reach, control, and subtlety, allowing it to operate within spaces where overt movement might reduce success. Through this design, it occupied a role shaped by precision, moving through the ancient seas with a presence defined not by scale, but by the careful extension of its reach into the shifting patterns of life around it. Speed took on a different meaning in these waters, not as sudden bursts alone, but as a sustained ability to move, with minimal resistance, across long distances. Within this fluid environment, certain forms refine their bodies into shapes that reduce drag to its lowest possible level. Ichthyosaurs carried this refinement to an extent that aligned them closely with the movement of the water itself, their outlines smooth and continuous, tapering at both ends to allow passage without interruption. Their bodies resembled a living curve, widest at the center and narrowing toward head and tail, a configuration that guided water around them rather than forcing it aside. The tail, shaped into a vertical fin, generated propulsion through controlled oscillations, each movement transferring energy efficiently into forward motion. This design allowed them to maintain speed over extended periods, covering distances that connected different layers and regions of the ocean. Along the sides, fins provided stability, adjusting orientation with subtle shifts that kept the body aligned during rapid travel. These adjustments were small, almost imperceptible, yet essential in maintaining a straight path through water that was never entirely still. Currents moved, pressure varied, and the ichthyosaur responded continuously, keeping its trajectory steady while conserving energy. At the front, the head tapered into a narrow form, reducing resistance while guiding the body forward. Within this streamlined structure, the eyes stood out in proportion, large and forward-facing, capable of gathering available light in environments where illumination was limited. In deeper or dimmer waters, where visibility decreased, this adaptation allowed them to detect movement that might otherwise remain hidden. The ability to move between depths expanded their range of activity. Ichthyosaurs did not remain confined to a single layer, but traveled vertically as well as horizontally, descending into darker regions and returning toward brighter zones. Their physiology supported this movement, with adaptations that allowed them to tolerate changes in pressure and oxygen availability. This flexibility opened access to prey that occupied different parts of the water column, increasing the variety of opportunities available to them. Hunting, within this context, became an extension of motion. Rather than waiting for encounters to occur within a limited space, ichthyosaurs actively moved through regions where prey might be found, using speed to close distances quickly. Fish and soft-bodied organisms formed a significant portion of their diet, their bodies well-suited to capturing smaller, agile targets that required both precision and timing. The teeth of ichthyosaurs reflected this approach. They were typically slender and conical, arranged in rows that allowed for secure grasping rather than cutting. Once contact was made, the structure of the jaws held the prey in place, preventing escape during the brief moment before it was consumed. This method aligned with a feeding style that relied on rapid interception rather than prolonged struggle. Evidence from fossilized remains indicates that some ichthyosaurs reached considerable sizes, yet even at larger scales, their bodies retained the streamlined efficiency that defined their movement. This consistency suggests that speed remained a central feature across different forms, regardless of variation in size or habitat. Within the broader system of ancient marine life, ichthyosaurs occupied a role shaped by continuous motion and visual sensitivity. Their presence connected distant parts of the ocean, linking surface and depth through patterns of movement that followed both prey and changing conditions. Through this design, they became among the most capable swimmers of their time, moving through the water with a quiet precision that reflected the balance between form and environment. Long before bodies grew massive or movement refined into speed and force, there was a different kind of presence drifting through the ancient seas, one that marked a turning point in how life interacted. Anomalocaris moved through these early waters with a form unlike those that would follow. Its structure built not around armor or size, but around coordination, perception, and reach. Its body was soft compared to later predators, composed of flexible segments that undulated gently as it advanced. Along its sides, lateral flaps rippled in sequence, producing a smooth, wave-like motion that carried it forward with quiet efficiency. This method of movement did not disturb the water abruptly, allowing it to approach other organisms without creating strong signals that might reveal its presence too early. At the front of its body extended a pair of appendages, jointed and lined with spines that curved inward. These limbs moved with precision, opening and closing in controlled arcs as they reached outward. Rather than relying on a single decisive bite, Anomalocaris engaged with its surroundings through these grasping structures, drawing prey closer before transferring it toward a circular mouth positioned beneath its head. This mouth, composed of layered plates arranged in a radial pattern, operated differently from later jaws. It did not hinge, but contracted inward, pulling material toward its center. The action was effective for soft-bodied organisms, compressing and processing them without the need for cutting or tearing. Combined with the grasping limbs, this feeding system allowed for a sequence of capture and consumption that unfolded in stages, each movement guided by coordination rather than force. Perhaps most notable was its vision. Positioned at the front, its eyes faced forward, providing overlapping fields of view that allowed depth perception. This arrangement enabled it to judge distance and alignment with a level of accuracy that earlier life had not achieved. Movement in the water became something that could be tracked and anticipated, rather than simply encountered. The ability to see in this way transformed interaction, introducing a new level of intention into predation. Evidence of this shift remains preserved in the fossil record, where certain organisms display damage that suggests attempted but incomplete capture. Some trilobites, for instance, bear injuries that align with the shape of Anomalocaris appendages, their exoskeletons cracked or deformed in patterns that indicate contact without full consumption. These traces reveal moments where the predator engaged, grasped, but did not succeed in finishing the process. Such outcomes suggest that early predation was not yet perfected. Coordination, strength, and timing were still in development, and not every encounter led to success. Prey could escape, carrying with them the marks of near capture. These interactions formed a feedback loop where both predator and prey adapted in response to each other, gradually refining their structures and behaviors over time. Within this evolving system, Anomalocaris occupied a role that bridged earlier forms of life with those that would come later. It introduced a combination of vision, reach, and movement that shifted the balance from passive interaction to active pursuit. The ocean, once shaped primarily by drifting and filtering, began to host encounters defined by tracking and capture. Its presence did not dominate through size or overwhelming strength, but through the integration of multiple capabilities that worked together. Each movement, each adjustment of limb or body, reflected a growing complexity in how life engaged with itself. In this way, Anomalocaris marked an early step in a longer progression, where predation would become increasingly refined, and the interactions between organisms would grow more direct and intricate within the vast and shifting waters. A subtle rearrangement within the head altered the direction of life in the oceans, not through sudden transformation, but through a gradual shift in how organisms interacted with what surrounded them. Structures that once filtered or gathered began to close, align, and press together with purpose. The first true jaws emerged from modified skeletal supports, their movement controlled by muscles that could bring opposing surfaces into contact with increasing precision. This change introduced a new way of engaging with food. Instead of relying on particles drifting within reach, organisms could now seize, hold, and process material directly. Contact became intentional, guided by alignment and timing rather than chance. The ability to close around a target created opportunities that extended beyond passive intake, allowing for selective feeding that favored mobility and responsiveness. With this development, variation expanded rapidly. Jaws did not form in a single design, but diversified into multiple configurations, each suited to different forms of interaction. Some grew narrow and pointed, capable of grasping small, agile organisms. Others became broader, distributing force across wider surfaces to manage larger or more resistant prey. Teeth, where present, began to vary in shape and arrangement, reflecting the type of material they were used to process. As these structures evolved, behavior followed. Movement through the water became more directed, shaped by the possibility of capturing specific targets. Organisms adjusted their paths, aligning themselves with the presence of others rather than drifting within general flows. The ocean began to hold patterns of pursuit and response, where one movement influenced another, creating sequences that unfolded across space and time. This shift did not occur in isolation. As some forms developed more effective methods of capture, others responded with changes that reduced their vulnerability. Bodies became more streamlined to allow quicker movement or more robust to withstand contact. Sensory systems refined their ability to detect motion, enabling earlier reactions to approaching threats. Each adaptation influenced another, creating a network of adjustments that extended throughout the ecosystem. The result was an increase in complexity that reached across multiple levels. Predator diversity expanded, not only in form, but in strategy. Some relied on speed, closing distances quickly to secure their targets. Others adopted methods based on timing and positioning, engaging at moments when resistance was limited. Still others combined multiple approaches, adjusting their behavior according to conditions and opportunity. Within this growing variety, interactions became more frequent and more defined. The presence of jaws allowed for clearer outcomes, where encounters led to capture or escape within shorter spans of time. Energy moved more directly through the system, transferred from one organism to another with greater efficiency. This flow supported further growth and diversification, reinforcing the patterns that had begun to emerge. Ecosystems adjusted to accommodate this new dynamic. Areas that once supported relatively uniform communities began to differentiate, shaped by the distribution of organisms with distinct roles. Some regions favored fast-moving predators and the prey that adapted alongside them. Others supported forms that relied on concealment or structural defenses. The ocean became a mosaic of interactions, each area reflecting a balance between different approaches to survival. This transformation introduced a rhythm that carried through subsequent developments. The ability to grasp and process food directly influenced how organisms moved, sensed, and responded to their surroundings. It connected structure with behavior in a way that allowed for continuous refinement, each generation building upon the changes of the last. Through this quiet yet profound shift, the nature of marine life moved toward a system defined by active engagement. The oceans, already rich with life, became environments where interaction unfolded with greater clarity, guided by structures that brought intention into every encounter. In the slow passage of generations, change did not arrive as a single shift, but as a continuous exchange between opposing needs. One form adjusted, and another responded. A surface thickened, and somewhere else, movement became quicker. This quiet back and forth unfolded across the oceans, shaping bodies and behaviors in ways that remained closely tied to one another. Some organisms leaned toward protection. Their outer layers hardened, forming plates or reinforced coverings that reduced the impact of contact. These structures did not appear all at once, but grew gradually, each layer adding resistance against the pressures of interaction. The weight of such protection altered movement, making acceleration more demanding, yet offering a degree of stability when contact could not be avoided. Elsewhere, a different approach emerged. Instead of resisting force, certain forms reduced their exposure to it. Bodies became more streamlined, surfaces smoothing to allow quicker passage through water. Muscles adapted to support bursts of motion, enabling sudden changes in direction that disrupted alignment during an approach. In this balance, survival depended not on enduring contact, but on avoiding it entirely. These two paths did not exist in isolation. As protection increased, so did the methods used to overcome it. Structures capable of applying concentrated force became more refined, allowing predators to engage with resistant surfaces in targeted ways. At the same time, as speed improved, detection systems adjusted, refining the ability to sense movement before it translated into escape. Visibility itself became part of this exchange. Some organisms developed patterns or forms that blended with their surroundings, reducing contrast and making their presence less apparent. Subtle variations in color, texture, and outline allowed them to merge with shifting backgrounds, especially in regions where light filtered unevenly. This concealment reduced the likelihood of being noticed, delaying interaction long enough to create a margin of safety. In response, sensory capabilities extended beyond simple sight. The detection of motion through water became increasingly important, with organisms interpreting faint disturbances carried through currents and pressure changes. Even when outlines were obscured, movement could still be perceived, allowing predators to align themselves with targets that were not clearly visible. This interaction between concealment and detection formed another layer of adjustment, each side refining its approach without reaching a final resolution. Over time, these patterns interwove, creating a system where no single strategy remained dominant for long. A body that relied on armor might persist until another form developed a way to penetrate it more effectively. A species that depended on speed could succeed until detection improved, narrowing the space available for escape. Each advantage carried within it the conditions for its own challenge, ensuring that change continued without pause. The ocean, already shaped by movement and proximity, became a place where adaptation operated on multiple levels at once. Physical structure, behavior, and perception all shifted together, guided by pressures that did not remain constant. Environments varied, encounters differed, and outcomes depended on how closely each organism aligned with the demands placed upon it. Through this ongoing exchange, evolution moved not toward a fixed state, but along a path defined by continuous adjustment. Each generation carried forward small refinements, building upon those that came before while responding to new conditions as they emerged. The result was not a single direction, but a dynamic balance, where survival was shaped by the ability to adapt within a system that never fully settled. In this way, the oceans held a quiet tension that persisted across time, a steady interplay between opposing strategies that ensured the process of change would continue without end. Not all movement in these waters followed the same intention. Some bodies traced long, open paths, while others remained nearly still, waiting within the slow drift of their surroundings. Beneath the surface, patterns of pursuit and stillness coexisted, each shaped by a different way of securing energy in a world where every action carried a cost. Speed emerged as one approach, defined by bodies built to reduce resistance and maintain forward motion with efficiency. These forms narrowed along their length, guiding water smoothly around them as they advanced. Muscles supported sustained travel, allowing distance to be crossed without immediate exhaustion. In this method, success depended on closing the space between predator and prey quickly, reducing the time available for escape. Precision mattered, but it was guided by motion, each adjustment refining a path that led toward contact. Yet, speed required continuous expenditure. Movement over long distances demanded energy that needed to be replaced through frequent success. When prey became scarce or dispersed, this approach carried risk, as extended searching could outweigh the gains of a single capture. The balance between effort and reward remained narrow, shaped by how often encounters occurred within the spaces being traversed. Elsewhere, a quieter strategy unfolded. Certain forms minimized movement, aligning themselves with features of the environment or settling within layers where visibility was reduced. Their bodies did not need to travel far, only to remain positioned where others would pass. In this stillness, subtle adjustments replaced continuous motion. A shift of fin or body aligned them with approaching presence, preparing for a moment that would unfold quickly. Ambush relied on timing rather than distance. When contact occurred, it did so within a brief window, where preparation gave way to immediate action. The energy spent remained low until that moment, making this approach efficient when successful. Yet it carried uncertainty, as long periods could pass without opportunity, and a single missed attempt could reset the process entirely. A third approach centered on force. Bodies that followed this path were structured to apply concentrated power within a short span. They did not require extended pursuit or concealment to the same degree, but relied on the ability to bring an encounter to a rapid conclusion once it began. Their forms often reflected this priority, with reinforced structures and mechanisms capable of delivering strong, controlled impacts. Force allowed engagement with prey that might otherwise resist or escape. The initial contact carried enough effect to reduce movement or overcome defenses, shifting the outcome toward completion. However, this method also demanded energy in concentrated bursts, requiring recovery before it could be repeated. The intervals between actions shaped the rhythm of existence for such forms, alternating between stillness and sudden exertion. Across these strategies, body shape revealed underlying intent. Long, narrow forms aligned with sustained movement, while compact, stable structures supported controlled positioning. Reinforced elements indicated an ability to apply pressure, while lighter builds reflected a reliance on speed or evasion. Each configuration represented a balance between different needs, where advantages in one area required concessions in another. These trade-offs ensured that no single approach dominated entirely. Speed could fail against early detection, ambush could falter without opportunity, and force could be limited by the need for recovery. The ocean held space for all of these methods, its varied conditions supporting multiple paths to survival at once. Within this shifting system, organisms adjusted their behavior and form in response to what surrounded them. The strategies they embodied were not fixed, but part of a broader pattern of adaptation that responded to both environment and interaction. Movement, stillness, and impact existed together, each shaping the flow of life in ways that remained connected to the quiet pressures beneath the surface. Within the quiet geometry of a jaw, small structures carried a significance that reached far beyond their size. Teeth, arranged in careful patterns, became the interface between intention and outcome, translating movement into effect. Their shapes varied widely, each form reflecting a different way of interacting with the material they encountered, each edge or curve aligned with a specific purpose. Some teeth bore fine serrations along their edges, minute projections that created a series of cutting points. When drawn across flesh, these edges did not slide smoothly, but caught and divided, allowing sections to be separated with controlled motion. This structure proved effective for organisms that engaged with larger prey, where reducing mass into smaller portions made consumption more manageable. The serrations increased efficiency, ensuring that each movement of the jaw contributed to the process. Other teeth remained smooth, their surfaces continuous and unbroken. These forms did not slice, but held. Conical in shape, they penetrated and secured, preventing escape while the rest of the jaw applied pressure. This design suited prey that required capture rather than division. Smaller bodies that could be swallowed whole once immobilized. The absence of serration reduced resistance during entry, allowing the tooth to pass into the material with minimal disruption. Between these extremes, variations emerged that reflected more specialized diets. Some teeth flattened, creating surfaces capable of crushing harder substances, while others curved inward, guiding prey deeper into the mouth with each attempt at escape. The arrangement of these teeth within the jaw further refined their function, spacing and alignment, determining how force was distributed and how effectively material could be processed. These differences were not isolated features, but part of a broader system where structure and behavior aligned. The shape of the tooth corresponded to the type of prey pursued, and the method of capture influenced how the teeth were used. Together, they formed a coordinated mechanism that linked anatomy with action, ensuring that each encounter could be managed in a way that supported survival. Yet beneath this variation, a common process operated quietly. Teeth, despite their strength, did not last indefinitely. Contact with resistant material, repeated use, and accidental breakage gradually wore them down. In response, many of these organisms developed the ability to replace their teeth continuously. New ones formed beneath or behind the existing set, moving into position as older teeth were lost or degraded. This cycle of replacement ensured that the functional surface of the jaw remained effective over time. Rather than depending on a fixed set of structures, these organisms maintained a dynamic system where renewal occurred as part of normal operation. The process did not interrupt feeding, but unfolded gradually, with new teeth emerging as needed to sustain performance. The presence of continuous replacement also allowed for risk in feeding behavior. Teeth could break during contact with resistant surfaces, yet this loss did not carry permanent consequence. The system compensated, restoring what had been lost and allowing the organism to continue engaging with its environment without long interruption. Through these mechanisms, teeth became more than passive elements. They acted as tools shaped by use, refined through interaction, and maintained through renewal. Their forms recorded the demands of the environment, reflecting the types of material encountered and the methods used to process it. In this way, the jaw held a quiet complexity, its small components carrying the weight of survival across countless encounters. Each edge, curve, and replacement cycle contributed to a system that translated motion into sustenance, linking structure with the ongoing rhythm of life in the ancient seas. Before contact ever occurred, the water itself carried signals, faint and shifting, moving outward from every body that passed through it. These signals did not appear as visible trails, yet they spread through currents and pressure changes, forming patterns that could be sensed by those equipped to receive them. In this unseen exchange, detection became as important as movement, guiding organisms toward what could not always be directly observed. Vision played a central role where light remained available. Eyes, positioned and shaped in different ways, gathered information from the surrounding space, interpreting motion, contrast, and direction. Some forms developed forward-facing placement, allowing overlapping fields of view that improved depth perception. Others carried eyes set more laterally, expanding awareness across a wider range, detecting changes that occurred beyond the immediate path ahead. The structure of the eye itself adapted to the conditions of the water. In brighter regions, clarity and range supported tracking across distance, while in dimmer environments, larger eyes increased sensitivity, gathering limited light to form usable images. This adjustment allowed certain predators to operate in depths or times of reduced visibility, where outlines softened and movement became the primary cue. Yet vision alone did not define detection. Water, as a medium, transmitted motion in ways that extended beyond sight. As bodies moved, they displaced the surrounding fluid, creating subtle variations in pressure that traveled outward. Some organisms developed the ability to sense these changes, interpreting them as indicators of nearby presence. These early detection systems, though simple compared to later forms, provided an awareness that did not depend on light. Through this sensitivity, a passing organism could be perceived without direct visibility. Its movement translated into a pattern of disturbance that revealed direction and speed. The ocean became a field of signals, where each motion contributed to a shifting map of activity. Predators aligned themselves with these patterns, adjusting their own movement to intercept what they sensed rather than what they saw. Chemical cues also moved through the water, carried in dissolved form. Substances released by living bodies dispersed gradually, forming gradients that could be followed. Some organisms responded to these traces, orienting themselves along increasing concentrations, guiding their movement toward a source that remained out of sight. This process unfolded slowly, yet it provided a persistent means of locating prey across distances where direct detection might not be possible. In darker regions, where light diminished further, these non-visual systems became more prominent. The absence of clear imagery shifted reliance toward pressure and chemical detection, allowing interaction to continue within environments that offered little visual information. Movement remained guided, not by what could be seen, but by what could be sensed through contact with the medium itself. These different forms of detection did not operate separately. They combined within organisms, each contributing to a broader perception of the surroundings. Vision provided detail where available, pressure sensing revealed motion beyond sight, and chemical cues extended awareness across time and distance. Together, they formed an integrated system that supported interaction within a complex and shifting environment. Over time, these capabilities refined, aligning more closely with the demands of each habitat. Organisms that moved through clearer waters emphasized visual tracking, while those in deeper or more turbid regions relied more heavily on other senses. Each adjustment reflected a balance between available information and the means to interpret it. In this way, the search for prey became a process shaped by perception as much as by movement. The ocean held layers of information that extended beyond what could be seen, and those able to interpret these layers gained access to opportunities that might otherwise remain hidden. Through this quiet exchange of signals, life moved within a world that was constantly revealing itself, one subtle cue at a time. Light thinned as it descended, not in a sudden break, but through a steady loss that altered how the ocean could be perceived. Wavelengths slipped away in sequence, leaving only faint traces that no longer defined edges clearly. Depth softened contrast, turning distinct forms into blurred silhouettes until even those dissolved into a quiet obscurity where distance became uncertain and direction relied on something other than sight. Within this gradual dimming, interaction did not slow, it adapted. Organisms continued to move through these layers, yet their encounters unfolded without the clarity that light once provided. Shapes could no longer be tracked across long distances, and motion revealed itself only at close range, often too late for adjustment. The ocean held activity that remained largely unseen, carried forward in a space where visibility no longer guided every action. In these conditions, darkness offered a different kind of advantage. Certain predators aligned themselves with this absence, their behavior shaped by senses that extended beyond vision. Subtle variations in water pressure, carried outward from any moving body, became a reliable source of information. These disturbances formed patterns that could be interpreted, allowing position and direction to be inferred, even when no outline could be observed. Approach within this environment followed a restrained rhythm. Without light to reveal their presence, movement could remain minimal, each adjustment measured to avoid unnecessary disturbance. Distance closed gradually, guided by signals that spread through the surrounding medium. By the time contact became possible, there was little indication for the prey to respond, as the cues that might have triggered escape remained too faint or too late. This dynamic shifted the balance of encounters. In brighter waters, detection often preceded engagement, allowing space for reaction. In darker regions, that interval narrowed or disappeared entirely. Encounters unfolded within brief moments, shaped by alignment rather than pursuit. The outcome depended on positioning and timing, rather than prolonged tracking across visible space. For organisms moving through these depths, behavior adjusted in response. Some altered their vertical range, remaining within layers where light provided a clearer view. Others continued through dimmer zones, relying on their own sensory adaptations to navigate and respond. Movement patterns changed, becoming more deliberate, as each action carried greater uncertainty without visual confirmation. The absence of light also influenced how presence was concealed. Without clear outlines, bodies did not need complex patterns to blend with their surroundings. Simply remaining within darker layers reduced visibility, allowing forms to exist without being easily distinguished. This natural concealment required no additional structure, only alignment with the conditions that surrounded them. At the same time, detection systems continued to refine. Sensitivity to movement through water became more pronounced, allowing organisms to interpret smaller disturbances with greater accuracy. Chemical signals, dispersed gradually, added another layer of information, guiding movement toward sources that remained unseen. Together, these cues formed a network of perception that extended beyond the limits of vision. Within this layered environment, the ocean divided into regions defined not only by depth, but by the way interaction occurred within them. Near the surface, light supported tracking and distance. Below, darkness shifted emphasis toward proximity and subtlety. Each zone held its own rhythm, its own balance between concealment and detection. In this way, darkness became part of the structure of the ocean, shaping behavior without interrupting it. Life continued to move and engage within these dim spaces, guided by signals that traveled quietly through water, revealing just enough for interaction to unfold. Distance stretched in every direction, a wide expanse where boundaries faded and structure gave way to open water. In these regions, the seafloor lay far below, and above, the surface offered little more than shifting light. Between them, there were no solid features to break movement or provide cover. The ocean became a continuous space, where presence was defined only by motion within it. As organisms moved away from coastal zones and complex seafloor structures, they entered this openness without the protection of fixed surroundings. There were no ledges to settle against, no dense formations to disrupt visibility. Every movement carried outward, its effect spreading through the water without obstruction. In such conditions, the distinction between being seen and remaining unnoticed narrowed considerably. Bodies traveling through this space could not rely on stillness for concealment. Without features to merge into, remaining stationary did little to reduce exposure. The water around them transmitted subtle disturbances regardless of movement, and in the absence of physical barriers, those disturbances traveled farther. Detection became more likely, not through clear sight alone, but through the accumulation of signals that revealed presence across distance. This openness altered how encounters unfolded. Instead of sudden proximity shaped by surrounding structure, interactions began at greater ranges. Movement could be tracked from afar, and alignment between organisms developed over longer spans. The approach became a matter of closing distance across an unobstructed path where direction and speed determined whether contact would occur. Within this environment, speed gained a different importance. It was no longer only a method of pursuit, but a means of survival. The ability to move quickly allowed organisms to reduce exposure time, to pass through open regions before detection could lead to engagement. Acceleration provided a brief advantage, creating separation when proximity became unavoidable. Sustained motion, combined with efficient body shapes, allowed some to navigate these expanses with greater control. For predators, speed also offered the ability to intercept. With fewer barriers to alter trajectories, paths could be predicted and adjusted over longer distances. A well-timed increase in pace could align a moving body with another, bringing them together within a shared point in space. The encounter, once established, unfolded rapidly, shaped by the momentum that carried both into contact. This dynamic placed pressure on both sides of the interaction. Prey required enough speed to evade, while predators required enough to close the gap. The balance between these needs influenced body design, favoring forms that could sustain motion without excessive energy loss. Streamlined shapes became more common, reducing resistance and allowing longer periods of travel without fatigue. At the same time, the absence of shelter meant that strategy shifted away from concealment toward anticipation. Movement patterns adjusted, with organisms altering direction or depth to avoid alignment with others. Timing became significant, as certain periods or layers offered slight variations in visibility or activity. These adjustments did not eliminate risk, but redistributed it, creating moments where exposure could be minimized. The open ocean thus became a space defined by continuous motion. Without places to withdraw into, organisms remained within a field of interaction that extended across vast distances. Each movement carried implications beyond immediate surroundings, influencing how others responded and how encounters developed. In this way, the lack of structure did not reduce complexity, it reshaped it. Survival depended on the ability to move efficiently, to adjust direction with precision, and to respond to the signals carried through the water. Within this wide and uninterrupted space, speed became not only an advantage, but a necessity woven into the rhythm of life itself. Scale expressed itself not only in appearance, but in the way an organism occupied its surroundings. A larger body displaced more water, carried more mass, and interacted with its environment through a broader physical presence. This presence could shape encounters before they fully developed, influencing how other forms moved in response and how distance was managed within shared space. With increased size came strength. Muscles extended across greater areas, allowing more force to be applied during movement or contact. Larger structures provided leverage, enabling actions that smaller forms could not easily replicate. When engagement occurred, this capacity for force could determine the outcome quickly, reducing the need for prolonged interaction. Power, in this sense, acted as a direct path toward resolution. Yet this advantage carried a cost that unfolded continuously. A larger body required a steady flow of energy to sustain its internal processes. Movement, even when efficient, demanded greater input, and periods without feeding placed immediate strain on the system. The margin for delay narrowed as the amount required to maintain balance exceeded what smaller organisms needed. Each successful encounter supported only a limited span before the cycle had to begin again. This demand influenced behavior in subtle ways. Larger predators often needed to move across wider areas, following patterns of availability that shifted over time. Their presence could not remain confined to a single region if resources diminished, and so movement became part of maintaining equilibrium. Distance, once an option, became a necessity, shaping paths that extended across different layers and locations. In contrast, smaller predators operated within a different balance. Their bodies required less energy, allowing them to persist through longer intervals without immediate feeding. This flexibility reduced the urgency of each encounter, enabling a broader range of responses to changing conditions. Movement could be more selective, guided by opportunity rather than constant need. Agility defined this approach. Smaller forms could accelerate quickly, altering direction with minimal resistance. Their lower mass allowed them to respond to sudden changes in the environment, adjusting position in ways that larger bodies could not match with the same speed. This responsiveness created a form of advantage rooted not in force, but in timing and control. Within encounters, agility allowed smaller predators to engage with precision. They could approach from angles that reduced exposure, align themselves with brief openings, and withdraw when conditions shifted. The interaction unfolded through a series of adjustments rather than a single decisive action, each movement contributing to an outcome that developed gradually. However, this method also carried limitations. Smaller size restricted the range of prey that could be effectively managed, and each capture provided less energy relative to what was expended. Success needed to occur more frequently, and missed opportunities accumulated over time. The balance between effort and reward remained delicate, shaped by how consistently encounters led to gain. Across the ocean, these differences in scale created a spectrum of strategies. Larger forms influenced their surroundings through presence and force, while smaller ones navigated through precision and adaptability. Neither approach existed in isolation, and each carried its own constraints alongside its advantages. The interaction between size and environment remained fluid. Conditions shifted, altering which traits aligned more closely with survival at any given moment. In some regions, the ability to exert force provided a clear benefit, while in others, the capacity to move with agility offered greater flexibility. Through this balance, size became neither a simple advantage nor a fixed burden. It acted as a defining feature that shaped how organisms moved, fed, and responded, linking physical scale with the broader patterns of life unfolding within the ocean. Traces of damage remained long after movement had ceased, recorded in the structure of bone as quiet evidence of lives shaped by repeated contact. These marks did not appear as isolated incidents, but as layered histories, surfaces bearing signs of fracture, compression, and repair. In many specimens, the outline of an earlier wound persisted beneath newer growth, a record of survival carried forward within the body itself. Healing, when it occurred, left distinct patterns. Bone thickened around the site of injury, smoothing sharp edges and reinforcing weakened areas. This process required time, a span during which the organism continued to move, feed, and interact despite the damage it carried. The presence of healed wounds suggests that survival, though uncertain, was not always brief. Some individuals endured multiple encounters, each leaving its own mark before being partially erased by recovery. Yet these same remains often reveal a different pattern alongside healing. Fresh damage intersects with older scars, indicating that encounters were not rare or widely spaced. Instead, they occurred repeatedly, each one introducing the possibility of further harm. The spacing and depth of these marks suggest contact with force, delivered through structures capable of penetrating or compressing solid material. These interactions unfolded across time, building a sequence of events within a single body. Among larger forms, the evidence becomes more pronounced. Broad surfaces carry multiple sites of impact, areas where structure has been compromised and later reinforced. These patterns indicate that size did not prevent injury, but may have increased exposure to it. Movement through shared space brought individuals into alignment with others of similar capability, and such encounters did not always resolve without consequence. In some cases, the damage appears concentrated in specific regions, suggesting repeated targeting of certain areas during interaction. These patterns reflect not only the presence of conflict, but the manner in which it unfolded, guided by structure and behavior. The body became both participant and record, holding within it the outcomes of multiple engagements. The frequency of injury implies that avoidance was not always possible. Even with adaptations that supported detection and movement, encounters still occurred with enough regularity to leave lasting evidence. The ocean, dense with activity, offered limited separation, and proximity increased the likelihood of contact. Each interaction carried risk, and that risk accumulated over time. Life within this system required a capacity to continue despite damage. Healing allowed temporary recovery, restoring function to a degree that permitted further movement and feeding. Yet each new encounter introduced additional strain, and the accumulation of injuries likely reduced overall resilience. Structures weakened by earlier damage may have been more susceptible to subsequent impacts, narrowing the margin for continued survival. This pattern suggests that lifespan for many organisms remained limited by the frequency and intensity of interaction. Survival was not defined solely by the ability to secure food, but by the capacity to endure repeated contact within an environment where such contact was common. Each moment of recovery extended existence, yet did not remove the underlying conditions that led to injury. The fossil record, in preserving both damage and repair, offers a quiet view into this balance. It reveals lives that persisted through multiple events, carrying the marks of each, while also hinting at those that did not recover, leaving behind only the final instance of contact. Together, These traces form a continuous record of interaction where survival was possible but never assured, and where each organism moved within a system shaped by constant exposure to harm. There was no true pause in the cycle of movement and consumption, only brief intervals where activity slowed before beginning again. Within these waters, existence depended on a steady flow of energy, and that flow had to be maintained through constant interaction. Every body, regardless of size or structure, required input that could not be stored for long without consequence. Metabolism operated as a continuous process, drawing from reserves that diminished with each moment of movement. Muscles required fuel to function, organs depended on steady supply, and even stillness carried a cost. Energy was not simply used during action, but consumed at all times, shaping a rhythm where the need to feed remained present beneath every behavior. For larger predators, this demand was especially pronounced. Their size required greater intake, and each successful encounter provided only a temporary balance. The intervals between feeding could not extend too far, as depletion would begin to affect movement, reducing the ability to pursue or engage effectively. This created a cycle where success had to be repeated regularly, each gain supporting only a limited continuation of activity. Smaller organisms faced a different scale of demand, yet the pattern remained similar. Their energy requirements were lower, but so too was the amount gained from each capture. This meant that feeding occurred more frequently, with shorter gaps between events. The rhythm of their existence unfolded through repeated, smaller interactions, each contributing incrementally to sustaining function. Across all forms, starvation remained a constant possibility. It did not arrive suddenly, but progressed through stages, each one reducing capability. Movement slowed, responsiveness diminished, and the ability to detect or pursue prey weakened. As these changes accumulated, the likelihood of successful feeding decreased further, creating a feedback loop that narrowed the chances of recovery. This pressure shaped behavior in subtle but persistent ways. Movement patterns often aligned with areas where prey was more likely to be found, guiding organisms toward regions of higher activity. Paths were not random, but influenced by past success and environmental cues, creating patterns that increased the probability of encounter. At the same time, risk could not be entirely avoided. The act of hunting required exposure, bringing organisms into alignment with others that might also pose a threat. Each attempt to feed carried both opportunity and danger, and the balance between them remained delicate. Avoiding all risk was not possible, as doing so would reduce the chances of securing the energy needed to continue. In this environment, efficiency became as important as success. The energy gained from each encounter needed to exceed the energy spent in achieving it. Strategies that minimized unnecessary movement or reduced the duration of interaction contributed to maintaining this balance. Over time, these efficiencies became embedded within behavior and structure, shaping how organisms approached each opportunity. The ocean, filled with continuous motion, held no fixed supply that could be relied upon indefinitely. Availability shifted, influenced by changes in environment and the actions of other organisms. This variability required constant adjustment, with movement and behavior adapting to follow patterns that remained in flux. Through this ongoing cycle, life persisted within a state of continuous demand. Feeding was not an occasional event, but a recurring necessity that shaped every aspect of existence. Each moment carried the need to maintain balance, and within that need, movement continued, guided by the quiet urgency of sustaining life in a system where the search for energy never truly ended. Far below the layers where most traces remain, the record of life grows quiet. Sediments accumulate differently in these depths, and the conditions that preserve form are less consistent. What remains is fragmentary, a collection of partial outlines and subtle impressions that hint at movement rather than fully describe it. Yet within these fragments, a different pattern begins to appear, one shaped by the demands of an environment where pressure, darkness, and limited resources defined every interaction. In these deeper regions, movement slowed, not as a sign of inactivity, but as an adjustment to conditions that required conservation. Energy could not be expended freely, and each motion carried a cost that needed to be balanced against uncertain gain. Bodies adapted to this constraint, their forms often reflecting a shift away from rapid pursuit toward controlled, deliberate action. Fins and appendages moved with measured precision, guiding the body rather than driving it at high speed. The scarcity of direct evidence suggests that encounters were less frequent, yet no less significant. Prey existed in lower densities, dispersed across vast volumes of water. This distribution reduced the likelihood of accidental contact, placing greater importance on detection and alignment. Predators in these regions relied on subtle cues, interpreting faint signals carried through the water to locate what could not be seen. When engagement occurred, it unfolded with care. The distance between organisms closed gradually, guided by small adjustments that maintained alignment without creating strong disturbances. Sudden movements could disrupt the process, dispersing the signals that had guided the approach. As a result, the final moment of contact often followed a sequence of restrained motion, each step bringing predator and prey into closer relation. Structures adapted to support this method. Jaws and grasping appendages reflected a need for secure capture once contact was made, as opportunities might not arise again quickly. The ability to hold effectively reduced the risk of losing prey after a prolonged approach. Teeth and surfaces were shaped not only for processing, but for ensuring that each successful encounter could be completed without unnecessary loss. Pressure increased with depth, altering the physical environment in ways that influenced structure and function. Bodies needed to withstand compression, and internal systems adapted to operate under these conditions. Movement through denser water required efficiency, and forms that reduced resistance while maintaining control proved advantageous. Temperature also played a role, often lower in these regions, affecting metabolic rates and further encouraging slower patterns of activity. The combination of pressure, temperature, and limited resources created a setting where rapid, repeated interactions were less feasible. Instead, behavior aligned with patience, each action extending over a longer span, each decision carrying greater weight. Despite the limited fossil record, certain preserved features suggest that these environments supported a range of specialized forms. Eye structures, where present, indicate adaptation to minimal light, while other sensory systems likely compensated where vision could not provide sufficient information. These adaptations point toward a system where detection relied on interpreting the environment through multiple channels, each contributing to a broader awareness. Within this space, the rhythm of life differed from that of shallower regions. Encounters were fewer, movements more measured, and outcomes shaped by precision rather than speed. The ocean, in its deeper layers, held a quieter form of interaction, where the absence of frequent contact did not diminish the importance of each event. Through these subtle traces, a picture emerges of a world where hunting persisted under different rules. The same need to sustain life remained, yet the methods used to meet that need adjusted to conditions that demanded restraint, efficiency, and careful alignment within an environment shaped by depth and distance. At times, the balance that held these oceans together shifted beyond the range that life could easily follow. Changes unfolded not as isolated events, but as broad adjustments in temperature, circulation, and chemical composition, each influencing the others in ways that spread across entire regions. The water itself, once supportive, began to alter in character, carrying conditions that no longer aligned with the needs of the organisms within it. Temperature played a central role in this transition. As it rose or fell beyond familiar limits, the behavior of the ocean changed with it. Warmer water held less dissolved oxygen, reducing the availability of a resource that many organisms depended on for basic function. At the same time, shifts in circulation patterns affected how oxygen was distributed, creating areas where it became scarce or nearly absent. In these regions, movement slowed not by choice, but by constraint. Bodies that required a steady supply of oxygen found themselves within water that could not sustain their usual activity. Metabolic processes weakened, reducing the capacity for motion, feeding, and response. The ocean, though still filled with water, no longer provided the conditions necessary for continued interaction at previous levels. As oxygen levels declined, the effects spread through multiple layers of the ecosystem. Smaller organisms, often forming the base of the food structure, experienced reductions in population. With fewer of these foundational forms available, the flow of energy upward diminished. Larger organisms, dependent on this flow, faced increasing difficulty in meeting their needs. The impact did not occur uniformly. Some areas retained more stable conditions, while others became zones of severe depletion. Boundaries formed between these regions, creating sharp contrasts in habitability over relatively short distances. Organisms capable of movement attempted to relocate, shifting toward areas where conditions remained more favorable. Yet, not all could move quickly enough, and many became confined within environments that continued to deteriorate. Fossil evidence reflects these moments through accumulations that differ from typical patterns. Instead of isolated remains, certain layers contain large numbers of organisms preserved together, suggesting rapid and widespread loss. The positioning of these remains indicates that death occurred within a limited span rather than over extended periods. This clustering points toward events that affected entire communities at once. Within these layers, diversity often appears reduced. A narrower range of forms persists, suggesting that only certain types of organisms could tolerate the altered conditions. Those with greater flexibility in their physiological processes or those capable of surviving lower oxygen levels remained, while others disappeared from the record entirely. The causes of these shifts varied, including changes in atmospheric composition, volcanic activity, and alterations in ocean circulation. Each factor contributed to a system that could move beyond stability, pushing conditions into ranges that life could not easily accommodate. Once initiated, these changes often reinforced themselves as reduced biological activity further affected the balance of the environment. Recovery, when it occurred, unfolded gradually. As conditions stabilized, new forms emerged, or existing ones expanded into the spaces left behind. The structure of the ecosystem reorganized, often differing from what had existed before. Patterns of interaction shifted, reflecting the new balance that had taken shape. Through these cycles, the ocean revealed a capacity for both support and disruption. The same system that allowed life to expand could, under different conditions, constrain it to the point of widespread loss. Within this dynamic, ecosystems remained connected to the underlying state of the water, their stability dependent on factors that extended beyond any single organism. There came intervals when the largest forms, once present across wide regions, grew less frequent in the record, their remains thinning until they disappeared entirely. This absence did not occur gradually through quiet replacement, but often followed periods of rapid environmental change that altered the conditions those organisms depended on. The same oceans that had supported their scale shifted in ways that no longer aligned with their needs. These changes unfolded through variations in temperature, chemistry, and circulation, each influencing how energy moved through the system. When conditions altered beyond certain limits, the balance that sustained large predators began to weaken. Their size, which once allowed them to dominate interactions, became a constraint when resources declined or became unevenly distributed. Apex predators depended on a continuous flow of energy from lower levels of the ecosystem. This flow required stability, not in a fixed sense, but within ranges that allowed prey populations to persist and reproduce. When environmental shifts reduced these populations, the effects traveled upward. Fewer prey meant less energy available, and for large predators, this reduction carried immediate consequences. Their requirements could not easily adjust. The amount of energy needed to sustain a large body remained constant, even as availability declined. Movement in search of food extended across greater distances, yet this increased effort further depleted reserves. The balance between expenditure and gain shifted, narrowing the margin for continued survival. At the same time, environmental changes could directly affect physiological function. Variations in temperature influenced metabolic processes, while shifts in oxygen levels altered the capacity for sustained activity. These factors combined, reducing the ability of large organisms to maintain their previous patterns of movement and feeding. Fossil layers that follow such intervals often show a noticeable reduction in the presence of large forms. Where once their remains appeared regularly, they become scarce or absent, replaced by smaller or more adaptable organisms. This pattern suggests that extinction events did not remove all life, but selectively affected those least able to adjust to the new conditions. The disappearance of apex predators carried further implications. Their role within the ecosystem extended beyond individual interactions, influencing the distribution and behavior of other organisms. Without their presence, patterns of movement and feeding at lower levels shifted. Prey populations, no longer constrained in the same way, could expand or redistribute, altering the structure of the community. Yet this change did not restore balance immediately. The loss of top-level predators disrupted established relationships, creating a period of adjustment where interactions reorganized. Some organisms benefited from reduced pressure, while others faced new forms of competition. The system, once structured around a particular set of interactions, moved toward a different configuration. Recovery, when it occurred, did not recreate what had been lost. New forms emerged, occupying roles that reflected the altered conditions. These replacements often differed in size, behavior, and structure, shaped by the environment that followed the change rather than the one that preceded it. The ocean continued to support large predators in later periods, but not always the same types or with the same dominance. Through these transitions, the presence of giants proved to be contingent rather than permanent. Their existence depended on a network of conditions that could shift beyond their capacity to adapt. When that network changed, even the most dominant forms could not persist. In this way, the history of these oceans includes moments where scale itself receded, leaving behind a record of absence that speaks as clearly as the remains that endure. In the quiet space left behind, movement did not cease, it reorganized. Where larger forms had once passed, with steady presence, smaller and more varied bodies began to fill the open paths. The absence created room rather than emptiness, and within that room, new patterns took shape, guided by conditions that no longer supported the structures that came before. Forms that emerged in these intervals often carried different proportions and behaviors, shaped less by overwhelming size and more by adaptability. Bodies became more refined in their balance between energy use and gain, aligning closely with environments that shifted more frequently. Movement patterns adjusted, favoring flexibility over dominance, allowing organisms to respond to changes with less constraint. Fish, in particular, expanded their presence across these reorganized systems. Their bodies, supported by internal skeletons and flexible fins, allowed for a wide range of motion, from steady cruising to rapid turns. This versatility enabled them to occupy multiple roles within the ecosystem, moving between layers and responding to variations in prey availability. Their distribution increased, filling spaces that had once been dominated by fewer, larger predators. Alongside them, other marine animals diversified in form and function. Some developed streamlined bodies suited for sustained movement, while others refined methods of precise interaction within smaller ranges. The variety of shapes reflected a broader range of strategies, each adapted to specific conditions rather than a single dominant approach. This shift altered the balance of the ecosystem. Instead of being structured around a small number of apex forms, the system became more distributed, with multiple levels contributing to the overall flow of energy. Interactions occurred across a wider network, reducing the reliance on any single group to maintain stability. The result was a system that, while still dynamic, carried a different kind of resilience. Feeding relationships became more intricate. Energy moved through a greater number of pathways, with smaller organisms playing more prominent roles in sustaining larger ones. This distribution allowed for adjustments when conditions changed, as the impact of loss in one area could be partially absorbed by others. The system remained sensitive, but its structure provided a degree of flexibility that had not been present before. Predators within this new balance did not disappear, but their form and behavior reflected the conditions that supported them. Instead of relying solely on size, they incorporated speed, coordination, and refined sensory systems to secure prey. Their interactions became part of a broader network rather than defining it entirely, contributing to a system where multiple strategies coexisted. Environmental conditions continued to influence these developments. Changes in temperature, oxygen distribution, and ocean circulation shaped where and how these organisms lived. Those that could adjust their behavior or physiology to match these variations persisted, while others diminished. This ongoing interaction between life and environment guided the direction of change, reinforcing patterns that aligned with current conditions. Over time, these processes led to the emergence of forms that would resemble those found in later oceans. The foundations of modern marine ecosystems began to take shape, built upon a balance that differed from earlier periods. Diversity increased, not just in the number of species, but in the range of interactions and roles within the system. Through this transition, the ocean did not return to a previous state, but moved forward into a new configuration. The space once occupied by giants became part of a broader network where adaptability and variation defined survival. Life continued, shaped by the same underlying principles, yet expressed through forms and relationships that reflected a different balance within the ever-changing sea. The present ocean carries a different rhythm, one that unfolds with fewer abrupt shifts and more gradual transitions across its vast spaces. Conditions still change, currents still move, and life continues to interact in constant motion. Yet the overall structure holds within narrower ranges. Temperature, chemistry, and circulation fluctuate, but often within limits that allow systems to persist without frequent collapse. This relative stability shapes how life organizes itself. Ecosystems develop layers that remain consistent over longer periods, allowing relationships between organisms to settle into patterns that can be maintained. Energy flows through these layers in a more predictable way, moving from smaller forms to larger ones, without the same degree of disruption that once altered entire regions at once. Within this structure, extremes appear less pronounced. Large predators still exist, and some reach considerable size, yet they are fewer in number and often more specialized in their roles. Their presence influences the system, but does not dominate it to the same extent as in earlier periods. Instead, they form part of a broader network where multiple species contribute to maintaining balance. Food chains reflect this distribution. Rather than relying heavily on a small number of dominant forms, energy moves through many interconnected pathways. Smaller organisms play a significant role, supporting layers above them through steady reproduction and widespread presence. This distribution reduces the impact of change in any single group, allowing the system to adjust without widespread loss. Predation continues, yet its intensity appears moderated by the structure of the ecosystem. Encounters occur within defined relationships where prey populations and predator demands align more closely over time. While variation still exists, the overall pattern tends toward equilibrium, with feedback mechanisms that limit extreme fluctuations. Environmental factors contribute to this balance. Ocean circulation patterns distribute heat and nutrients in ways that support large, stable regions of productivity. Oxygen levels remain within ranges that sustain a wide variety of organisms, reducing the likelihood of large-scale depletion. These conditions provide a foundation upon which life can persist and adapt without facing constant disruption. Adaptability remains essential, but it operates within a context that allows for continuity. Organisms still adjust to local changes, shifting their behavior or distribution as needed, yet these adjustments often occur within a system that remains broadly intact. This continuity supports the development of long-term strategies where survival depends not only on immediate response, but on sustained interaction over time. The absence of frequent, large-scale disturbances does not eliminate complexity. Instead, it allows complexity to deepen. Relationships between species become more intricate, with interactions extending across multiple levels and regions. The ocean becomes a network of connections, each contributing to the overall structure that defines how energy and life move within it. This difference in feeling arises from the balance between change and stability. The ocean still holds movement, still carries the traces of interaction in every current. Yet those interactions unfold within a framework that absorbs variation rather than amplifying it. The result is a system that appears calmer, not because activity has diminished, but because its patterns have become more evenly distributed. In this way, the present ocean reflects a long history of adjustment. It carries forward the outcomes of earlier shifts, shaped by conditions that have gradually moved toward greater stability. Within this environment, life continues to adapt and interact, guided by a balance that allows for persistence alongside the quiet complexity of the sea. Some patterns do not vanish. They soften and continue, carried forward within new forms that move through the present ocean with quiet familiarity. The shapes have changed, the balance has shifted, yet certain ways of sensing, pursuing, and capturing remain, traces of earlier systems still present beneath the surface. Among the most enduring of these forms are sharks, whose lineage extends far into the past. Their bodies reflect a design that has been adjusted over long spans rather than replaced. Cartilage provides a framework that supports flexibility without the weight of dense bone, allowing movement that remains efficient across different conditions. This structure, combined with a streamlined form, enables steady travel through water with minimal resistance. Their teeth, arranged in rows and replaced continuously, maintain a constant readiness for interaction. Each tooth serves its purpose for a time, then yields to another forming behind it, ensuring that function is not interrupted. This system reflects a long-standing adaptation, one that supports repeated use without requiring prolonged recovery. Sharks also carry sensory systems that align with ancient methods of detection. Their ability to perceive chemical signals in the water allows them to locate sources at great distances, following gradients that guide movement toward potential prey. At closer range, specialized structures detect subtle changes in water pressure, revealing motion that might otherwise remain unnoticed. These combined senses create a layered awareness, allowing them to navigate environments where visibility alone is not sufficient. In deeper regions, other predators exhibit traits that echo earlier patterns. Bodies adapted to low light rely less on vision and more on alternative forms of detection. Some possess enlarged eyes, suited to capturing faint illumination, while others depend on sensing movement through surrounding water. These adaptations reflect continuity, shaped by conditions that have persisted even as surface environments stabilized. Movement strategies also show continuity. Ambush remains a viable approach, with predators positioning themselves in ways that reduce detection before closing distance at the final moment. Speed, when used, is often brief and controlled, applied at the point of engagement rather than sustained over long pursuits. This balance between stillness and motion reflects a pattern that has endured, where energy is conserved until it is most effective. In open water, pursuit continues as another enduring method. Predators capable of sustained movement track their targets over distance, adjusting speed and direction to maintain alignment. The interaction unfolds over time, guided by endurance and control, rather than immediate force. This approach, too, carries echoes of earlier systems, where the ability to maintain pressure over distance proved as important as the final capture. Even the relationship between predator and prey retains familiar elements. Prey species respond with their own adaptations, forming groups, altering movement patterns, or developing structures that reduce vulnerability. These responses create a dynamic where each side influences the other, maintaining a balance shaped by continuous adjustment. The ocean today, though more stable, still holds these interactions within its depths. The forms that move through it carry within their structures the results of long refinement, not entirely new, but built upon foundations that extend far back. Each movement, each method of detection, each strategy of approach reflects a continuity that links present life with earlier systems. Through these echoes, the past remains present, not as a direct repetition, but as a subtle influence, shaping how life continues to interact. The ocean holds these patterns within its ongoing motion, allowing them to persist in forms that adapt while retaining the essence of what came before. Beyond the reach of regular observation, the deeper ocean remains only partially revealed, its vastness extending into regions where direct study is limited. Pressure increases steadily with depth, and light fades until it no longer penetrates, leaving conditions that challenge both movement and visibility. Within these layers, exploration proceeds slowly, guided by instruments that can withstand the environment, yet still capturing only fragments of what exists there. The seafloor itself varies, shaped by ridges, plains, and trenches that form a complex landscape beneath the water. These structures create spaces where organisms can settle, move, or interact, each area offering different conditions that influence how life develops. Sediments accumulate over time, preserving traces in some regions while leaving others with little record at all. Within this environment, species continue to be identified, often through brief encounters recorded by remotely operated vehicles or sampling devices. Many of these organisms differ significantly from those found in shallower waters, reflecting adaptations to pressure, temperature, and limited food availability. Their forms suggest solutions shaped by conditions that remain relatively constant over long periods, yet still present challenges that require specialized responses. Some organisms display structures that appear delicate, yet function effectively under high pressure, their bodies supported by the surrounding water. Others exhibit reduced skeletal elements or modified tissues that maintain flexibility without compromising integrity. These adaptations allow movement and interaction within a setting where conventional structures would not perform in the same way. Behavior within these depths is more difficult to observe directly. Encounters are infrequent, and when they are recorded, they often provide only brief glimpses of interaction. Predatory behavior, feeding strategies, and communication methods remain only partially understood, inferred from limited evidence rather than continuous observation. Each recorded moment adds to a growing picture, yet much remains unobserved. Detection in this environment relies on systems that operate without reliance on light. Sensory structures respond to chemical signals, pressure changes, and subtle vibrations, allowing organisms to interpret their surroundings through multiple channels. These systems enable movement and interaction despite the absence of visual cues that dominate in shallower regions. Food sources are also distributed differently. Some organisms depend on material descending from above, small particles that settle slowly through the water column. Others utilize localized sources, such as chemical gradients near geological features. These variations create multiple pathways for sustaining life, each aligned with specific conditions within the broader environment. Exploration technologies continue to extend the range of observation, yet the scale of the deep ocean remains far greater than what has been examined. Each expedition reveals new details, yet also emphasizes the extent of what remains unknown. The patterns observed so far suggest a system that is both stable and complex, shaped by factors that operate over long timescales. The limited nature of direct evidence means that understanding develops gradually. Hypotheses form from available data, then adjust as new observations emerge. This process reflects the challenge of studying an environment where access is constrained and conditions limit continuous presence. Within this partially revealed world, life persists in forms that reflect both continuity and difference. The same fundamental processes of movement, detection, and feeding remain, yet expressed through structures and behaviors adapted to a setting defined by depth and distance. The ocean, in these deeper layers, holds a quiet extension of the patterns seen elsewhere, shaped by conditions that slow observation but do not diminish complexity. What remains hidden is not separate from what is known, but part of a continuum that extends beyond the current reach of direct understanding, waiting within an environment that continues to shape life in ways still being uncovered. Long after the conditions that defined those earlier oceans had shifted, their influence remained embedded within the forms that continued to move through the water. The past did not disappear. It settled into structure, shaping how bodies formed, how systems functioned, and how interactions unfolded across time. Each adaptation carried within it a history of pressure, refined through repeated selection until it became part of a lasting pattern. Evolution, in this sense, acted as a continuous process of adjustment. Traits that supported survival under intense conditions were not discarded when those conditions eased, but retained, modified, and integrated into new contexts. The result was a layering of features, where older adaptations persisted beneath newer ones, contributing to the overall design of the organism. Structures associated with movement reflect this continuity. Streamlined forms, developed to reduce resistance and conserve energy, remain common across a wide range of marine life. The ability to move efficiently through water continues to provide advantage, regardless of whether the environment demands rapid pursuit or steady travel. These shapes, once shaped by urgency, now support a broader range of behaviors. Sensory systems also carry this legacy. The capacity to detect chemical signals, pressure changes, and subtle movements persists across many species, allowing them to interpret their surroundings with precision. These systems, refined under conditions where detection could determine survival, remain effective even as environments have become more stable. They provide a depth of awareness that supports interaction across varying levels of visibility and distance. Feeding mechanisms show similar continuity. Teeth designed for cutting, gripping, or crushing reflect a history of adaptation to different types of prey. The diversity of these structures suggests a long process of refinement, where each variation aligned with specific needs and conditions. Even as prey types have changed, the fundamental approaches to capturing and processing food remain grounded in earlier developments. Behavioral patterns, too, carry traces of the past. Strategies such as ambush, pursuit, and coordinated movement continue to appear across different species. These methods, once shaped by environments with constant pressure, now operate within systems that allow for greater balance, yet the underlying approaches remain recognizable. Each strategy represents a solution that proved effective over long periods, and so persists in adapted form. At the level of ecosystems, the influence of earlier events is evident in how systems are structured. The distribution of roles, the flow of energy, and the relationships between organisms all reflect a history of adjustment following periods of change. Past disruptions, including shifts in climate and the loss of dominant forms, have contributed to the current balance, shaping how ecosystems function today. This layering of history creates a continuity that extends beyond individual species. The ocean as a whole carries the imprint of earlier conditions, expressed through the combined presence of traits, behaviors, and relationships that have been shaped over time. Each organism contributes to this continuity, embodying both current adaptation and inherited structure. The result is a system where the past remains active within the present, not as a direct repetition, but as an influence that guides how life continues to evolve. New adaptations emerge, yet they do so upon foundations that have been established through earlier pressures. The ocean, in its current form, reflects this ongoing process, where change builds upon what has come before. Through this perspective, the lasting impact of those earlier worlds becomes clear. They did not end, but transformed, their influence carried forward within the living structures that persist. Each movement within the ocean today echoes a history shaped by pressure, adaptation, and continuity, linking present life to the conditions that once defined it. From above, the ocean often appears still, its surface reflecting light in slow, shifting patterns that suggest a quiet expanse. Waves rise and fall with a steady rhythm, and between them there are moments where the water seems almost motionless, as if holding its breath. This calm impression has long shaped how the ocean is perceived, a vast body that appears composed and stable when viewed from a distance. Beneath that surface, however, movement continues without interruption. Currents travel across great distances, carrying heat, nutrients, and organisms through layered pathways that rarely intersect in simple ways. These flows are not visible from above, yet they define the structure of the ocean, guiding where life gathers and how it moves. Within these layers, interactions unfold continuously. Organisms navigate through shifting gradients, responding to changes in temperature, pressure, and availability of resources. Feeding occurs, movement adjusts, and relationships between species persist, all within a system that remains active regardless of how calm the surface may appear. This contrast between appearance and activity creates a difference between perception and reality. The surface presents a simplified view, one that smooths over the complexity beneath. It reflects light and movement in ways that mask the depth of interaction occurring below, offering an image that does not fully convey the ongoing processes within the water. In earlier periods, the intensity of these interactions may have been more apparent in their outcomes, with frequent disruptions altering entire regions. Today, the system tends to absorb variation more gradually, allowing activity to continue without the same visible shifts. This creates a sense of steadiness, even as the underlying processes remain dynamic. Predation continues, though it is often hidden from view. Encounters occur within layers where light diminishes, or at depths where direct observation is limited. The absence of visible disturbance does not indicate a lack of interaction, but rather the distance between where observation occurs and where these processes take place. Even in shallower regions, where light reaches the seafloor, much of the activity remains subtle. Movements are often small in scale, distributed across many organisms rather than concentrated in a few. This distribution reduces the visibility of individual events, blending them into a continuous pattern that does not draw immediate attention. The ocean's structure contributes to this effect. Layers of varying density and temperature create boundaries that separate regions, limiting the direct transfer of motion from one layer to another. Activity within one layer may not disturb the surface above, allowing intense interaction to occur without altering the visible calm. Human observation, limited by perspective and technology, often captures only a portion of this complexity. What is seen from the surface or through brief glimpses below does not fully represent the continuous processes that define the ocean. Understanding develops through extended study, revealing patterns that are not immediately apparent. The difference between past and present lies not in the presence of activity, but in how that activity is distributed and perceived. Earlier systems may have displayed their intensity more openly through frequent disruption, while the current ocean holds its activity within structures that maintain outward stability. In this way, the quiet ocean seen today reflects a balance between visible calm and hidden motion. Beneath the surface, life continues to interact, adapt, and move within a system that remains active at all times. The stillness observed from above is not an absence of change, but a surface expression of deeper processes that continue without pause, shaping the ocean in ways that are felt more than seen. What remains is not a single image of what once was, but a quiet continuity that moves through the present ocean, carried within every form that drifts, swims, or waits within its depths. The earlier world, shaped by intensity and constant pressure, has not been erased. It has settled into structure, into instinct, into the subtle patterns that guide how life still unfolds. The ocean today holds that memory in its living systems. Each organism carries within it a set of responses refined across immense spans of time, responses that did not disappear when conditions changed, but adapted to new balances. Movement still follows the same fundamental principles, shaped by efficiency, timing, and the constant need to sustain life within a shifting environment. Predation, in all its forms, continues without interruption. The methods vary, the scale differs, yet the underlying process remains consistent. Organisms seek, detect, approach, and capture, guided by systems that have been refined through countless interactions. These sequences unfold quietly, often beyond direct observation, yet they persist as part of the ocean's continuous motion. The difference lies not in the presence of these interactions, but in how they are distributed. Where once pressure concentrated activity into more immediate and visible outcomes, the present ocean disperses it across wider networks. Encounters still occur, yet they are woven into a system that absorbs and redistributes their effects, maintaining a balance that allows continuity. Within this balance, strategies that once defined survival remain visible. The careful stillness of an ambush, the measured alignment of pursuit, the precise moment of contact, all persist in adapted forms. These behaviors are not relics, but active expressions of processes that have endured. They connect present life to earlier conditions, linking each movement to a deeper history. The ocean itself continues to shape these interactions. Currents guide distribution, temperature influences behavior, and chemical signals carry information across distance. These elements create a framework within which life operates, much as they did before, though now within ranges that support greater stability. The environment and the organisms within it remain in constant relation, each influencing the other in subtle, continuous ways. Even in regions that appear calm, the underlying processes remain active. Movement continues through layers. Interactions unfold within spaces that are rarely seen, and life persists through patterns that do not require visibility to exist. The surface reflects only a fraction of this activity, offering an impression that does not fully convey the depth of what continues below. Time has not removed the instinct to hunt, nor the need to respond. It has adjusted the conditions under which these processes occur, shaping a system where balance emerges more often than disruption. Yet within that balance, the same fundamental interactions persist, guiding how life continues to move and adapt. The memory of that earlier world is not held in isolation, but integrated into the present. It exists within the structures of bodies, within the patterns of behavior, and within the relationships that define ecosystems. Each organism, in its own way, reflects a continuity that extends beyond its immediate existence. Beneath the surface, this continuity unfolds without pause. The ocean carries forward the outcomes of its history, not as a fixed record, but as an ongoing process. Life continues to respond, to adjust, and to interact, guided by principles that have endured through change. In this way, the story does not conclude. It continues quietly, shaped by the same forces that once defined it, now expressed through a balance that allows it to persist.